78th birthday, and we just want to record pieces of her life. What is your full name, including your maiden name?
Louise Richards Judd.
What does this name mean, or were you named after someone?
I was named after my grandmother, Richards, my father's mother, and her name was Louisa Letitia Peary. And then she married my grandfather, so she was Louisa Letitia Peary Richards. And I loved my name, but when I was in college, an upperclassman whose name was Letitia, and she was a beautiful Southern belle, and everyone called her Tish. And I thought, oh, why didn't my parents name me Letitia rather than Louise, so everyone could call me Tish and I could look like this beautiful, tall, blonde Southern belle. That reminded me of another story, and I'm going to do this, I guess. My mother was making an Easter dress for me, and I looked, this was when I was very young, and I looked at the pattern. The picture on the pattern had this darling girl with dark, long ringlets. And I said, will I have the ringlets too?
You sort of picture when you're looking at stuff, you're like, oh, I'm going to end up looking just like that.
That's right.
So your grandmother was named Louisa.
Louisa.
Letitia.
Letitia.
Where were you born?
I was born in Salt Lake, and in the LDS hospital. And at that time, my mother had to stay in the hospital for 2 weeks. And I have a friend now whose name is Leah Burroughs Feld. And we figure that we've known each other since we were in the hospital, because her birthday's on the 12th of April. My mothers were in the hospital at the same time, in the same hospital.
Funny. Yeah, the next question is, were you born in a hospital or at home? And we're just going to skip that one. So
That was the old LDS hospital that was up on tops of the avenues? Was
It's
that?
still there.
Is that the one I was born in?
No.
What were your parents like?
Well, my mother was an only child, an only daughter, had 3 brothers, and she had a good education. She graduated from Columbia University in New York City, and a lot of women were doing that at the time. She majored in home economics and came back to Salt Lake and taught in the Murray High School. And consequently, cooking was something that was always an important part of our family life, because my mother had studied it, and she was also on the radio giving recipes, and wrote a book. One time she worked for a department or a grocery store called IGA, and her radio name was Ida G. Abbott. And then she worked for an egg company, but I don't know what her name was. Maybe it was Judith Abbott at that time. So all the time that I was growing up, my mother was working on her radio continuity. That was writing her script for her radio show.
How fun.
And my father, he was a lawyer, and it was during the Depression that he was trying to start his career. So he started raising chickens at one time, and then he managed the Ambassador Hotel dining room. So they were both doing things, and he was, I think, influenced by my mother, and he was always influenced by my mother. throughout his life, but this was the beginning that I see. And then they, after he, or maybe it was simultaneously, no, I think it was after he had the dining room management, they opened 2 restaurants in Salt Lake. One was called the Plantation, and the other was called the Cottage.
Is there?
Mhm.
There's still a cottage up in Logan.
Is there? Well, this one. And then,
Cottage restaurant.
then he became interested in politics and managed Senator King's campaign, and that was a successful campaign. And because of that, he was then part of the spoils method of politics is that you get a government job, and he was then made head of the Federal Housing Commission here in Utah, and that determined really his lifetime work, because from there he went on to be head of the National Federal Housing in Washington, D.C., and that was the time that we moved back to Washington.
Awesome. Did he then become one of the 12 apostles or equivalent someday?
Yeah, he did. He did. Then, in his later life, he was at one time. He was, when I was growing up, he was not really active in the church. He was more concerned with his career, and when you're in politics, it takes you away a lot on Sunday, campaigning, and he was a campaign manager. So he was not interested in his interest, although he had gone on a mission, but he came back and became somewhat inactive until they moved back to Washington, D.C., and then he resumed activity, and indeed he was later, and I'll have to look up that date where you could find it, that it was when, it was actually around in the early 1960s, maybe 1961, that he was called as 70, and he was the first president of the 70s Quorum.
Awesome. I didn't know that whole story. Who are your favorite relatives and why?
Well, through the years, I didn't know the Richards relatives because my father was the tail end of his family. But his brother, Ren Richards, who was next to him, I was very close to them, to Uncle Ren and Aunt Janine, and we would go up to, after I was married, the families would go up to Sun Valley, and Uncle Ren would love to ice skate up there. And at the time I was married, my wedding reception was held at Uncle Ren and Aunt Janine's home, which is on 13th East and about 10th South. Oh, well, I'll tell you about it. The Kearns relatives were closer at that time because there were 2 children. My Uncle Jay and Aunt Blanche's family had children my age and Frank's age and David's age. And I went through school through junior high and high school with Pat Kearns, my Kearns cousin. And we also, as little children, played together a lot. Didn't play with the Richards children because
Was Pat still alive?
Pardon?
Pat Kearns?
Pat is still alive. Mm-hmm. You think you'd like to
Yeah.
meet him? Or see him?
I think so.
And Joan is really a remarkable woman. She's not interested in the church especially, but has really been a real stalwart. I have a great deal of regard for Joan. And Sue, the youngest, who was Dave's age, married Ben Banks. And Ben is now retired, but he was a member of the 70s choir. Uncle Henry is the only one in the Kearns family, any one of Mother's siblings that is still alive. And he's been a prominent influence in our family's life. He, as the youngest brother, well, I knew him when I went to the ranch, and that was in the 30s, and he was there with Aunt Ruth on the ranch, and then he has kept in touch with me through the years and was a tremendous influence in Dan's life. So I have to mention Uncle Henry because he calls me I owe him a phone call now. Calls me to see how I am and tells me he loves me, and it's just.
How's he doing?
Well, we could call. Well, he won't. He might be there. We could call him today. I will call him today because he'll be interested that we are all together.
That's a great
Yeah,
so
he
nice.
is.
Do you want to tell us about your siblings and like their names and how they're born in relationship to you?
Okay, I'm the oldest, and then Dan was born. Frank was born maybe 2 years after I was born, and Dave is 7 years younger than I am, and Nancy is almost 14 years younger than I am. And of course, when Nancy was born, I was busy in high school and college, and didn't really know her very well until she came back at the time of Bart's death, and since then has been major influence in my life and a wonderful confidant and friend.
Now let me just get this. Frank is 2 years younger than you, and Dave is 7 years younger?
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
You're welcome. They were all born in Salt Lake, and we lived early on. I mentioned the chicken farm. We lived in Holiday in a chicken farm. We moved to a place on 7th East and about 3rd South. And then I now have a vague recollection of that, vague recollection of the chicken farm. But my most vivid memories of childhood start when we moved to a home on 7th East and 17th South, right kitty corner from the Hawthorne School, and the streetcar ran right in front of our house. And it was a very busy corner. And the left garage, service station and garage, was directly north across the street. And that has been there until just recently. And it closed down just recently.
Did you ever get into any trouble? What happened, and did you get punished?
Well, the biggest, it was not a punishment so much as it was, I think, my being assertive in my teenage years. I don't remember a lot. My parents were were not harsh as far as punishment was concerned, and I wasn't a goody-goody, but I'm sure that, and I did things, but the one thing that stands out in my mind is that when I was maybe around 14 or 15, my father had purchased a portion of the ranch. During the Depression, my grandfather had lost, he had a ranch up in East Canyon of around 9,000 acres, and he unwisely invested returns from that. This was in the 20s. He put his money into mining rather than, and that was speculative investment in mining. And then the Depression came, and he even, I guess, had put a mortgage on his land, on his ranch, so he lost everything. And my father was able to buy a very small portion right on the creek below the dam, closer to Porterville. And he had a couple there, and this was the ranch that my Uncle Henry, the portion where I remember Uncle Henry living there for a while. And also later, when Uncle Henry left, another couple, Glenn and Darlene, lived there. And we would go up every weekend to the ranch. And that was really hard for me because I wanted to be down with my friends. And I remember one Saturday morning, I had decided I was not going to go up there. There was going to be something I wanted to be home for. And my father parents, I guess, did not want to leave me. So my father came up to my room and gave me a good spanking, insisting that I go with him.
When you're 15?
14 or 15. And, you know, it was hard for me to ever freely forgive him for that.
The next question is, did you have a nickname besides Mimi, or?
I did. When I was in college, there was another, no, I didn't get Tish, but there was another Louise in my pledge class, Louise Owings. And so my pledge sisters, in order to distinguish the two Louises, called me Dickie because of my last name. And I was called Dickie by I guess, most of the people there at the university at that time. And whenever I hear that name, I still have friends who call me that, particularly my dear friend Dottie Wilson and her husband, and they always call me Dickie still. So if I get a call and I hear someone, Dickie, I know just exactly what part of of my life they knew me.
Where did you go to school? What were your favorite subjects, and what were your least favorite subjects?
Well, that's another kind of life-changing experience. I attended Salt Lake Schools, Hawthorne, and then in the 3rd grade. I started in Hawthorne when I was in kindergarten, and then moved to Yale Avenue and about 17th South when I was in the 3rd grade. That was when my father had taken the job with the federal housing, and we moved into the home of some of my parents' friends, the Jenkins, who were going to go over to Hawaii for several years. So we were going to move into their home. And so I went to school there, and
Yale Avenue.
we lived on Yale Avenue.
Funny, you'd be like, yeah, when I was in 3rd grade, I went to Yale Avenue, and I went to Yale.
That's right. Yeah. And then we moved from there, but I still stayed in the UN school. But we moved over by 9th South. It wasn't Greenwood Terrace, it was another street close by there. And we leased a home there. And then finally, I guess when I was in maybe 6th grade or even went to Roosevelt High School, junior high, we moved into another house on Yale Avenue and about 16th East. Right, and there was a big, it was where Yale Avenue and Yale Crest Avenue split, and there was and there still is, a green parking area in between those two, kind of a triangle. And that was a great place to live because all of the guys came and played football, or in the area, came and played football on that big green parking there. And that was a good place when you were a teenager to be. Then I went 1 year to East High School, and then my father received a position still with the Federal Housing in Washington, D.C. And that was in 1941. So we moved just prior to 1941 when Pearl Harbor was that December. So we were there just a few months in Washington before Pearl Harbor. And it was a very, very hard time for me, and especially, well, I think for Frank and Dave also. Nancy was too young, but to move after living in Salt Lake. Now, actually, we moved to Silver Spring, Maryland, and the interesting thing about that was that it was a sleepy little suburb of Washington. And the high school was just a country high school. In fact, there were only about 10% who went on to college at that time. And I remember that I had taken 2 years of Latin and wanted to take the 3rd year there. And they did not offer that, but they were offering 4th year. So for me, they combined the 3rd and the 4th year of Latin. I'm not sure that I got very much out of it, but it was an interesting experience, and I made friends there, but never felt like I belonged, and have always felt sort of felt like an orphan, not having moving back to Salt Lake and not really feeling comfortable, but I have gone to the East High reunions for my class. They've always been nice to include me, but I felt like an interloper at times, but I've never wanted to go back to the reunions at this Silver Spring High School. And interestingly enough, besides another alumni, it was Goldie Hawn of the Silver Spring High School there.
But she's like younger than you, isn't she? She's a lot younger than you.
Oh, yes. A lot younger.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's just the same school as your
Just
mom
the
and-
same school, but we were not. And it was just, as I said, just a small country high school. But since then, they've torn it down just in the recent years and rebuilt, from what I understand, a big new high school there. And I'm not sure if it was called something beside the Silver Spring High School. I think it was, but it keeps coming to me, but I don't have it. I'll try to remember it. But it was, and then my parents had promised me that I would be able to come back and go to the University of Utah. And then the war broke out, and we came back the summer after the war broke out and lived with my Aunt Blanche, Uncle Jay, Kearns' wife. They were divorced at the time, and she just treated us so well and let us live in her home. And I had such a good time that summer that I think I was going to live with my grandmother, Kearns, and I think my parents thought I would have been a handful for my grandmother. So I think they felt that maybe I should go back. They insisted that I go back with them, and that was hard for me to do, because all of my friends were going to go to the U, and were going to get in sororities, and it all sounded so exciting to me. But I look on that when I returned to Maryland and started to get interested in the people there and joined a sorority. I joined Tridel, and remember one time that, and I think I've talked about this, that influenced me more than any decision at that time, that was being rushed to different sororities, and one of them was Kappa, and I felt like that was one that if I had been in Salt Lake, I probably would not have joined, but I knew some people. In fact, a boyfriend's sister was a Kappa, and she'd written a recommendation for me. I just really liked the idea of being a Kappa, but I didn't like the girls that were pledging Kappa nearly as much as I liked the ones that were pledging Tridel. So I pledged Tridel, and
What's the full name? Tri-Delta what?
Delta, Delta, Delta.
Oh, okay.
So it's three deltas. And I was in their pledging ceremony, and I started thinking, and I thought, I've made a terrible mistake. I should have pledged Kappa. And my mother had sort of been pushing Kappa, because I think she felt that that was what I wanted. And I thought, I made a terrible mistake. I should have gone Kappa. And I thought at the time, and I can remember this vividly, it's only a mistake if you let it be. If it's going to be whatever you make it. And I thought, it just that period, and I think of that so vividly, that was the time that I learned that indeed you took the responsibility for your own life, and that you couldn't blame your mother or anyone else. You made that decision, and you had to make the most of it. And I did, and loved it, loved my friends, and at the junior year, the president was leaving, so they elected me president, and I was president part of my junior year and all of my senior year. And then went on after that, had an opportunity to travel for a year as the National Traveling Secretary, and traveled to 30 different chapters on the Eastern Seaboard, all by myself. And I remembered that here, I had gone to only 11 grades because during the Depression, in order to save money, they had combined the 6th and 7th grade, what they called the articulating unit. So we did that and then went on to 2 years in junior high and 2 years in high school. That was 11 grades. All of my friends in the East had gone to, for an extra year, and had gone to 12. So I was a year younger than they were, and when I went out as a traveling secretary, I was the same age as a traveling secretary. I went as a rush aide to the University of Kentucky. And while I was there, I would help them with the rushing. I'd be in their rush meetings, and then we would go out to dinner, and we'd walk along the street, and I would feel one of them taking my elbow to help me over the curb. And I thought, this is too much. Here, I just graduated from high